I remember the exact moment I first saw Elise. She was sitting cross-legged on the campus lawn, completely absorbed in her worn copy of The Great Gatsby. The autumn breeze tousled her dark hair while golden sunlight painted everything in warm hues. My camera was already in my hands before I realized it. Some moments just begged to be captured. She looked up at the sound of my shutter clicking, and instead of being annoyed, she flashed this brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. "Are you going to at least show me how I look?" That simple interaction kicked off days filled with coffee shop debates about art and literature, impromptu photo sessions around Boston, and nights sprawled on dorm room floors sharing our wildest dreams. Elise wanted to write stories that would change lives. I wanted to create visuals that would move people. Together we felt like we could conquer the world. Our first kiss happened during finals week. We'd been studying in the library until 3 a.m., both delirious from caffeine and stress. Walking her back to her dorm, she suddenly pulled me under a streetlight and pressed her lips to mine. Everything clicked into place in that moment, like finding the perfect focus on a photograph. We weren't perfect. Sometimes her intensity clashed with my laid-back nature. She'd get frustrated when I took life too casually, while I'd feel overwhelmed by a constant drive to analyze everything. We broke up twice during college, once over her summer internship in New York, and again when I considered transferring to a different school. But somehow we always gravitated back to each other. There was this magnetic pull between us that defied logic. Even during our breaks, we'd still end up calling each other at midnight to share good news or seek comfort after bad days. Our friends joked that we had some sort of cosmic connection. When one of us was down, the other would inexplicably show up with coffee or comfort food. The physical chemistry between us was just as powerful. One look could spark an entire conversation. One touch could ignite a fire that consumed us both. Even in a crowded room, we moved in sync, always aware of each other's presence. It was like we'd discovered our own frequency that only we could tune into. During our senior year, we fell into a rhythm that felt unshakable. Mornings in the campus coffee shop, afternoons in the photography studio or the library, evenings cooking dinner in my cramped apartment. The simple moments became our masterpiece, her reading her latest writing piece, while I edited photos, both of us lost in our crafts but completely present with each other. Looking back, those college years with Elise felt like living in a perfect bubble where anything was possible. We were young, ambitious, and hopelessly in love. Neither of us could have predicted how life would test that bond, or how our paths would twist and turn in the years to come. I still remember the day Elise burst into our apartment, waving the acceptance letter from Trinity College Dublin like a victory flag. Her eyes sparkled with a joy I hadn't seen since our early college days. In that moment, watching her dance around our cramped living room, I knew my decision was already made. "We're going to Ireland, Landon. Can you believe it?" The next few months flew by in a blur of preparations. I resigned from my design firm, sold most of our furniture, and convinced myself that finding work in Dublin would be easy with my portfolio. We arrived in late August, the Irish summer rain welcoming us with its perpetual drizzle. At first, everything felt magical. We explored Trinity's historic campus, got lost in cobblestone streets, and discovered hidden pubs where locals shared stories over pints of Guinness. Elise thrived in her program, making friends with her classmates and diving deep into her studies. But while she bloomed, I withered. The reality of being an American trying to work in Ireland hit hard. Every job application met the same response: "We need you to have a work permit." But I couldn't get a work permit without a job offer. This cruel catch-22 drained our savings faster than I'd anticipated. My chronic back pain, which I'd managed to control back home, flared up with vengeance in the damp Irish weather. Without proper health insurance, I couldn't afford the specialists or treatments I needed. Simple tasks became ordeals. Even sitting at my laptop to work on freelance projects became an exercise in endurance. Our studio apartment in Rathmines, which had seemed charmingly cozy at first, began to feel like a cage. While Elise spent long hours at the library or attending seminars, I paced our small space, trying to ignore the growing sense of uselessness. The few freelance gigs I managed to secure barely covered groceries. "You should come to this literary event tonight," Elise would say, her face glowing with excitement. "James Joyce's great-grandson is giving a talk." But I'd look at our dwindling bank account and shake my head. "I need to finish this project," I'd say, or "my back's acting up again." The disappointment in her eyes cut deeper each time. 3 months in, I sat in our local cafe, calculating numbers for the 100th time. My tourist visa would expire soon. The immigration officer had been clear. Without employment or student status, I couldn't stay. Our savings were nearly gone, and my health was deteriorating. That night, I waited for Elise to return from her evening class. The rain hammered against our windows, matching my somber mood. When she walked in, shedding her wet coat, I knew I had to tell her. I need to go back to Boston. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elise stood frozen, her coat still in her hands. It's temporary, I added quickly, though the lie tasted bitter. Just until I can sort out the visa situation and save some money. You need to focus on your studies, not worry about supporting both of us. I watched her face crumple, then quickly compose itself, a talent she'd always had. She crossed the room and sat beside me on our second-hand couch, taking my hand in hers. Her fingers felt cold from the rain. We knew this might be challenging, she said softly. But we've always figured things out before. But this wasn't like our college breakups, where distance felt romantic and temporary. This was reality crushing our dreams with its cold, practical fist. I couldn't tell her how scared I was, scared of failing her, scared of becoming a burden, scared of watching her succeed while I floundered. I'd been back in Boston for 3 months when I made the call. My apartment felt emptier than ever as I paced the hardwood floors, phone pressed against my ear. Each ring stretched like an eternity until Elise's voice came through, bright and musical as always. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words tasting like ash. We're living completely different lives now. The silence on the other end crushed my chest. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I know. That should have been the end of it. Clean break? Move on? Let her live her Dublin life while I rebuilt mine in Boston. But life's never that simple when it comes to Elise. She came back to visit her family that Christmas. One text led to coffee led to dinner, and suddenly we were tangled in my sheets like we'd never said goodbye. The morning light painted her skin gold, and I traced the familiar constellations of freckles across her shoulders, pretending time hadn't passed. I miss this, she whispered. Miss you. Then she was gone again, back to Ireland, back to her writing and her dreams. But the pattern was set. Spring break, she showed up at my door unannounced. Summer, I met her at her parents' beach house. Fall. Another visit, another night, another goodbye. Each time I convinced myself it would be different. Each time she slipped away like water through my fingers. My friends stopped asking about her. They saw what these visits did to me, how I'd spend weeks afterward checking my phone, hoping for messages, living for the next time she'd be stateside. I became that guy, the one who couldn't let go, who kept orbiting the same star even as it burned him. During her last visit, I broke down. We were lying in bed, and I could already feel her planning her escape. Stay, I pleaded, hating the desperation in my voice. You can write here. There are programs here. Just stay. She stroked my face, eyes soft with pity. Landon, please. We could make it work this time. But I saw it in her eyes before she said a word. Ireland had become more than just a place to her. It was freedom, opportunity, a life she'd built without me. I was asking her to give up her dreams for mine, and we both knew she wouldn't. She left the next morning. I stood at my window, watching her cab disappear around the corner, feeling like I'd lost her all over again. Only this time I finally understood I'd never really had her to begin with. 5 months crawled by like molasses in winter. I threw myself into work, redesigned my entire portfolio website, and even started rock climbing at the local gym. Anything to keep my mind off her. The pain dulled from a sharp stab to a quiet ache. I was getting there, slowly but surely. That Thursday night, I'd just finished microwaving leftover pad thai when my doorbell rang. Probably the neighbor asking to borrow tools again. I opened the door without checking. My heart stopped. Elise stood there, mascara running down her cheeks, hair windblown from the autumn breeze. She wore that green sweater I always loved. Landon, her voice cracked. I made a huge mistake. I gripped the doorframe, anchoring myself. What are you doing here? I was engaged. The words hit like a punch to the gut. To someone in Dublin. But I couldn't go through with it. Every time I looked at him, I saw you. Every time he touched me, I remembered us. My throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because I broke it off. Because I realized I've been running from the one thing that matters most. She stepped closer. You. It's always been you. I backed away, letting her follow me inside. The microwave beeped insistently in the background. I know I hurt you, she continued. I know I chose everything else over us, But I want to make it right. I want to come home. Home? I laughed bitterly. Your home is in Dublin. You made that very clear. No. My home is with you. I'll move back here, find a job, do whatever it takes. She reached for my hand. I let her take it. Just give me one more chance to prove it. I studied her face, those familiar green eyes, the tiny freckle above her lip, the way her chin trembled slightly when she was trying not to cry. Everything I'd tried so hard to forget. If we do this, I said slowly, there are conditions. You move back here, not to New York or Chicago or anywhere else. You find work nearby. And most importantly, no more running. She nodded vigorously. I already looked at apartments. There's one available just down on Beacon Street, and I have 3 job interviews lined up next week. My heart thundered in my chest. This was everything I'd wanted 5 months ago. Everything I'd begged for. But now that it was being offered, fear gripped me. I need time, I said, to think about this. Of course. She squeezed my hand. I'm staying at the Marriott. Take all the time you need. 2 days later, I texted her. We met at our old coffee shop, and I told her yes, we could try again. The smile that lit up her face reminded me of that first day on the campus lawn, when she looked up from her book and changed my life forever. Within a week, she'd signed a lease 4 blocks away from my place. The job interviews went well. She accepted an offer at a publishing house in Cambridge. Day by day, she worked to rebuild what we'd lost, showing up with takeout when I worked late, leaving post-it notes with quotes from my favorite poems on my fridge. I wanted to believe. God, how I wanted to believe this time would be different. The morning after Elise came back into my life, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. My apartment felt different, brighter, more alive. The coffee machine hummed in the background as I scrolled through travel websites, planning our first weekend getaway. I wanted to make up for lost time. Over those first few months, we fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Every Wednesday, I'd leave work early to surprise Elise at her new office with lunch. The way her face lit up when I walked through those doors made every minute worth it. We'd sit in the small courtyard outside, sharing stories about our days, and I'd watch her gesturing animatedly while talking about her latest writing projects. That summer, I planned our first big trip together, a week-long adventure through the Pacific Northwest. I remembered how she'd always talked about wanting to see the redwoods. The look on her face when I handed her the tickets was everything. We drove down the coast, stopping at every little bookstore we could find. In a tiny shop in Oregon, I watched her run her fingers along the spines of old books, completely lost in her own world. That's when I knew, really knew, that this time was different. Back home, our relationship deepened. I started leaving little drawings hidden around her apartment, quick sketches of moments we'd shared, each one dated and captioned. She kept every single one, pinning them to a cork board that grew fuller by the week. For her birthday, I recreated our first meeting. Set up a blanket on the same spot on campus where I'd first seen her reading. Even tracked down the same edition of the book she'd been holding that day. The photography part was trickier. Had to convince a friend to hide nearby with a camera, just like I had done all those years ago. When we got there, and she realized what I'd done, she started crying. Happy tears, she said. We spent countless weekends exploring small towns within driving distance, finding hidden gems of restaurants and quirky museums. I loved watching her discover new places, the way she'd immediately start imagining stories about the people who lived there. During one of these trips, we found ourselves caught in a sudden thunderstorm. Ended up taking shelter in this tiny coffee shop, both of us soaking wet and laughing. The owner gave us warm blankets and hot chocolate. We stayed there for hours, playing board games and making up stories about the other customers. Around our 1.5-year mark, I started planning bigger surprises. Booked us tickets to Ireland, not Dublin this time, but the countryside she'd always wanted to explore more. We spent 10 days driving through winding roads, staying in small BBs, and hiking along dramatic coastlines. One evening, sitting in a pub in Galway, listening to local musicians play, she leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for bringing me back here differently." I knew exactly what she meant. The idea of moving in together came naturally. We'd practically been living between our 2 apartments anyway, and it felt silly to keep paying double rent. I started looking at places that would give us both space, somewhere with good natural light for my design work, and a quiet corner where she could write. Found this perfect spot in an old converted factory building with huge windows and exposed brick walls. When I showed it to her, she immediately started planning where everything would go, already seeing our future there. Each day brought new moments of joy, small discoveries about each other that we'd somehow missed before. Like how she hummed old jazz songs while cooking, or the way she'd leave coffee-stained rings on manuscript pages when she was deep in editing. I learned to read her moods better, to understand when she needed space to write, and when she needed company. She learned to recognize when my back pain was acting up, even before I said anything. 2 years in, looking at her sleeping peacefully next to me, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The anxieties that had plagued our earlier relationship were gone. We'd grown up, learned from our mistakes, and found our way back to each other stronger than before. Every morning I woke up grateful for this second chance, determined to make each day count. I was packing my overnight bag for the weekend trip to Maine when Elise called. My family had been looking forward to finally having her join us at the lake house. Mom kept talking about teaching her the secret family recipe for blueberry pie. My mom's really sick. Elise's voice crackled through the phone. I need to fly to South Carolina right away. The sudden change of plans caught me off guard. Is it serious? Do you want me to come with you? No, stay with your family. I'll keep you posted. I tried pushing down the disappointment as I drove up alone to Maine. The familiar scenic route along the coast didn't have its usual calming effect. My phone stayed quiet most of the weekend, with only brief updates from Elise about her mum's condition. Days turned into weeks. Our daily calls dwindled to sporadic texts. Each time I asked about coming down to help, she deflected. Actually, I caught chickenpox from Mum, her message read one morning. The doctor says I'm contagious. Better stay away for now. Something felt off. Chickenpox in adults was rare, and Elise had mentioned having it as a kid. When I brought this up, she stopped responding for days. I kept myself busy at work, trying not to check my phone every 5 minutes. The projects that usually excited me felt hollow. Our apartment seemed emptier, even though most of her things were still here. The little notes she used to leave on the fridge had started to curl at the edges. My sister called to ask how Elise was doing. I realized I didn't have a clear answer anymore. The excuses were piling up, each one more confusing than the last. First it was her mum being sick, then the chickenpox, then some vague complications she wouldn't elaborate on. Just need more time, she'd text. Things are complicated right now. I'd stand in our kitchen, staring at the calendar where we'd marked the Maine trip together, now crossed out and forgotten. The trust we'd rebuilt over 2 years felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Yet I kept making excuses for her, telling myself this wasn't like before, that we were stronger now. But at night, lying alone in our bed, that familiar dread crept back in. The same feeling I'd had in Dublin, when our calls grew shorter and her life there became increasingly separate from mine. Still, I forced myself to believe her stories, even as they made less and less sense. After all, we'd overcome so much to get here. This had to be different. The crisp October air carried the sound of children's laughter and rustling leaves as Elise and I spent Halloween weekend together. Her sudden return felt like a dream after weeks of sparse communication. We carved pumpkins on my back porch, our hands sticky with pumpkin guts, and later curled up on the couch watching horror movies. Her head rested on my chest just like before, and for those brief moments everything felt right again. But the warmth of that weekend faded fast. Her texts grew shorter, calls went to voicemail, and that familiar pit formed in my stomach. After 2 weeks of barely hearing from her, I drove to her apartment complex across town. Something wasn't adding up. The parking lot was eerily empty. No sign of her blue Volkswagen. I climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, each step heavier than the last. When I reached her door, the nameplate was blank. My key still worked, but as the door swung open, my heart sank. The apartment was stripped bare. No furniture, no photos on the walls, no plants in the windowsill. Just empty rooms with dust bunnies in the corners. The closet doors hung open, revealing naked hangers. Even the bathroom cabinet where she kept her endless collection of lotions stood empty. My hands shook as I called her number, pacing the vacant space where her couch used to be. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Landon. Her voice was small, guilty. Where are you? Your apartment, everything's gone. A long pause followed. I had to move back home. Dad's sick now too, and with Mom still recovering, plus my student loan payments kicked in, and I just couldn't. When were you going to tell me? My voice cracked. Were you even going to tell me? I wanted to, I was embarrassed. Everything's falling apart, and I couldn't face you. Couldn't admit I failed at making it work here. I sank down against the wall, feeling the cool surface against my back. The same wall where we'd hung that ridiculous abstract painting she'd found at a yard sale. You could have told me. We could have figured something out together. She started crying softly on the other end. I know. I'm sorry. I need time to sort everything out. I wanted to be angry, wanted to demand real answers, but the pain in her voice felt genuine. Maybe she really was struggling with everything. Maybe I was being too suspicious. Okay, I said finally, rubbing my temples. Just don't shut me out like this again. Please. The gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something about Elise's excuses felt off. The chickenpox story made no sense. She'd had it as a kid. I remembered her showing me the tiny scar near her collarbone, and her father's sudden illness. It struck me that she never mentioned which illness exactly. I pulled up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My finger hovered over Mark's name. He'd always been close with Elise during college. After 3 rings, he picked up. Hey man, weird question. Have you heard from Elise recently? A long pause on the other end. Not directly, but... My stomach dropped. But what? I saw some stuff on Instagram. Through mutual friends. You might want to check it out. I hadn't been on social media much lately. Elise had convinced me to take a break from it months ago, saying it would be good for our mental health. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. With shaking hands, I created a new account. It took less than 5 minutes of searching through our old college friends' profiles to find what I dreaded. There she was, tagged in photos from Dublin. Recent photos. Her smile radiant against the backdrop of Trinity College, her arms wrapped around a tall man with dark hair. The same man from years ago, her former fiancé. The timestamps mocked me. These weren't old pictures. They were from 2 weeks ago, when she was supposedly caring for her sick mother in South Carolina. My chest tightened as I clicked through to a wedding planning website. James and Elise, our journey continues. The page detailed their upcoming ceremony in Dublin, complete with their romantic reunion story. According to the site, they'd never really broken up. She just needed time to sort things out back in Boston. The room spun. 2 years of my life, of building a future together, reduced to nothing more than her convenient fiction. Every weekend trip, every shared meal, every whispered promise, all lies. She'd been playing 2 lives and I'd been too blind to see it. I scrolled through more photos. There she was at Christmas markets, hiking in the Wicklow Mountains, celebrating birthdays, a whole parallel life she'd hidden from me. Each image felt like another betrayal, another knife twisting deeper. The final photo showed them outside a small Dublin cottage, a sold sign visible in the background. The caption read, "Our first home together." Dated 3 months ago, right around when she started making excuses about not being able to see me. Looking at those photos, I realized I'd never really known Elise at all. The woman I loved was a carefully crafted illusion, designed to keep me holding on while she built her real life somewhere else. The doorbell rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I knew it was her before opening. Elise had texted earlier saying she needed to see me. My stomach churned as I let her in, watching her familiar movements as she slipped off her coat and shoes. "I've missed you," she whispered, wrapping her arms around my neck. I hugged her back mechanically, breathing in her perfume, the same one she wore in all those photos with him in Dublin. My hands trembled as I made us tea, watching her curl up on my couch like she belonged there. We fell into our usual pattern, her stories about work, my updates about projects. I nodded and smiled, letting her nestle against me while my phone burned in my pocket with screenshots of her engagement photos. Her ring finger was bare now, but I'd seen the diamond sparkling in those pictures. When she led me to the bedroom, I followed. I let her kiss me, touch me, whisper sweet nothings. Each word felt like acid on my skin. I laid there afterward, watching her peaceful sleeping face, wondering how many nights she'd spent in his bed with that same expression. Morning came too quickly. As she gathered her things to leave, something in me snapped. I couldn't take another second of this charade. "How long have you been engaged to him?" She froze. Mascara wand halfway to her eye. "What?" I pulled out my phone, pulled up the photos. Her in a white dress, beaming next to a tall man in Trinity College's courtyard. Them kissing in front of the cliffs of Moher. Holiday parties, family gatherings, a whole life documented on social media, while I sat in Boston believing her lies about sick parents. I can explain, she stammered, makeup forgotten. 2 years, Elise. 2 fucking years you've been living this double life. The tears started then. Right on cue. She crumpled onto my bed, shoulders shaking. My family, they were in so much debt. His family offered to help, but only if. If you married their son? The disgust in my voice surprised even me. You don't understand the pressure they put on me. The expectations. I never wanted to hurt you, Landon. I love you. You have to believe that. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman I'd loved since college, who I'd followed to Ireland, who I'd given second and third chances to. Now she sat there, tears streaming down her face, spinning another story about family pressure and financial obligations. The worst part was, underneath my anger, I felt sorry for her. Sorry that she felt so trapped by her family's expectations that she'd destroy everything we had. Sorry that she'd become someone who could lie so easily for so long to someone who loved her completely. The first few days after Elise's confession, I struggled to look at her without feeling sick to my stomach. She'd show up at my apartment, eyes red and puffy, clutching coffee or takeout as peace offerings. I let her in every time, but my responses were mechanical, calculated. Gone were the days of genuine smiles and warm embraces. She'd sit on my couch, the same one where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies and sharing dreams, and I'd position myself in the armchair across from her, maintaining a physical barrier. When she spoke, I nodded at appropriate intervals, my face a mask of indifference. Remember that cafe in Dublin where we first? She'd start trying to evoke nostalgia. I'd cut her off with a sharp look, my jaw clenching. Every memory she brought up felt tainted now, knowing she'd been building a life with someone else simultaneously. She tried everything. Left sticky notes on my fridge with inside jokes, cooked my favorite meals, even recreated our first date. But each gesture only amplified my disgust. When she reached for my hand across the dinner table, I'd pull back as if burned. Her touch felt like acid on my skin. One evening she broke down completely. Please, Landon. Tell me what I can do to fix this. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but cold contempt. You can't fix lies, Elise. But I didn't ask her to leave. Instead, I started recording our conversations on my phone, documenting her visits, her toughisms, her desperate attempts at reconciliation. Each time she mentioned her fiancé or their plans, I saved it meticulously. When she'd call late at night, crying about her choices, I'd hit record before picking up. My apartment became a stage, and I played my part perfectly. I'd nod sympathetically when she'd talk about her struggles, all while my phone captured every word. She'd share details about her double life, thinking I was warming up to her again, never suspecting I was building a case to send to her fiancé. Watching her unravel brought me a satisfaction I never thought I was capable of feeling. Every time she'd leave my apartment in tears, I'd review the recordings, organizing them chronologically. The man who once would have moved mountains to see her smile now found peace in her pain. It took weeks to compile everything. Pictures, voice recordings, text messages, a complete documentation of her deception. When I finally had enough evidence, I created a detailed timeline of her lies and sent it to her fiancé through social media. My friend Mark called me months later with news about Elise. Her fiancé had ended things, and her family was facing some difficulties. I hung up the phone without comment, poured myself a drink, and felt absolutely nothing. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.